So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the session today. The session today is going to be about how do we account for the water quality benefits of projects. In short, we call it water quality benefit accounting, or WQBA. My name is Nanda. I am Corporate Water Stewardship Associate at the Water Resources Institute. And this is actually my last session that I'm hosting today. So I promised myself that I'm going to go for a swim in a lake in Rotterdam. That is where I'm located at. The lake is, like right in the city. And as I'm thinking about the lake, what really strikes me is, why it is important to keep water quality, high water quality in public areas, because otherwise I wouldn't go to the lake after my session today, and I will be worried about getting some diseases after swimming in a lake. So that leads to the topic of the presentation today, water quality benefit accounting. The initiative is started by three organizations from Limnotech, the Nature Conservancy, and the Water Resources Institute. I'm very excited about the people that are in the project, as well as the people that are presenting today. So from the three organizations, we are joined by a very good group of experts from different fields. Today, we have an agenda of trying to introduce what the Water Quality Benefit Accounting Initiative is about. And Kari from the Nature Conservancy is going to give you that introduction. After that, we have tried to understand what are the existing tools, data, and methods available to understand the water quality challenges. And we will show you our findings from that exploration by Derek from Limnotech. And then afterwards, we will tell you a bit about the different water quality standards and existing corporate commitments that will be done by me and Caroline. And then later, we will open up a panel discussion from water quality benefit accounting application. The panel is going to be joined by Madhu from Coca-Cola, Carolina from AB InBev, and Truka from Cargill. So first, I would like to invite Kari to give a little bit of background on what a water quality benefit accounting initiative is about, what's the project plan, and etc. So you will know more about the water quality benefit accounting from this presentation.
Thank you so much, Nanda. So very happy to be here today and to introduce the project to you all. And looking forward to hearing feedback from folks on the phone about where we're heading here. So to start off with, we just wanted to give you a sense of what we mean when we're talking about water quality benefit accounting. We're really trying to provide guidance on how to account for a project's water quality benefits. So it's really important to point out that this is at the project scale. So it's we're not talking about the whole watershed, but actually just specific projects like nature-based solutions, some great interventions like stormwater upgrades, agricultural best management practices, and other kinds of on-the-ground projects that companies and other actors might invest in to help improve the watershed health. So, and it's really also important to point out that this is, as I said, a project accounting guide, but not an impact measurement guide. So we have other guidance that we've published around monitoring and evaluation to help measure the actual impact in the freshwater ecosystem. What we're talking about here is really trying to just track the benefits of a project along a balance between being really science-based, but also really practical, so that one use of this might be to help track the contribution of a project, for example, to a wider corporate water quality goal, or to help actors account for water quality co-benefits of projects that might have other types of primary goals, such as a water quantity goal. Next slide, please. So to help give a little bit of clarity to what we're talking about here, we're providing an example of a certain type of project. So here, the example is a riparian buffer, which is a vegetative strip at the edge of where the land meets the waterway. And this riparian buffer can provide a whole variety of benefits to the waterway, to the terrestrial ecosystem. And what we'd be tracking here is what are the water quality benefits that could be delivered through this riparian buffer. So for example, the types of benefits we might account for could be pounds of nitrogen or phosphorus filtered from the overland runoff by the riparian buffer. And for example, we might calculate this using general information about the loading of these pollutants on the landscape and average pollutant removal rates. So we're still working on which methods we will be promoting through the guide or suggesting through the guide, but this is just an example of what we're talking about here in terms of the approaches we might take and the benefits we might be accounting for. So again, we're not looking at the in-stream, we're not monitoring in the stream the improvement in water quality, although that's really important. And for all of these projects, the projects that the Nature Conservancy implements and other actors that companies might be investing in, almost always we're thinking about how we measure that impact in the stream itself. But this guide is really focused on accounting for those more general water quality benefits as part of, as I mentioned, tracking towards a larger global goal or trying to understand what a water quality co-benefit might be of a project. So we're balancing that sort of making sure we're using scientific information and approaches, but also trying to be as practical as possible in providing those estimates. Next slide. So to give you a sense of where we're heading with this, this slide is presenting our current thinking about the table of contents for the guidance. So obviously, I think over time, we will adjust this as we're getting into the work and as we're getting feedback about what might be most valuable. But just to give a sense to the audience about what you might expect from the actual guidance document itself. So we'll start off with an overarching executive summary and background. We will talk about the kind of history of water stewardship activities. We will touch on the volumetric water benefit accounting guide, which many of you might be aware of, and for which this guide is basing a lot of sort of the approaches and how we're going about developing the methodology. Then we'll talk about objectives approach. We'll describe the landscape assessment process, including what was and what was not included in this effort. So we're already having to make decisions about how to refine our scope so we can't include everything we might want to include out there about water quality benefits. So we are going to talk about how we made our decisions or what's included here. And with that, we'll just include the methods so that the bulk of the guide will be the collection of methods for water quality benefit accounting. So we'll do this for different types of activities, like the activities that I showed a couple of slides ago, or by different pollutants. So with the water quality benefit accounting, there'll be a number of pollutants that we cover in terms of providing guidance on how to calculate the benefits of activities around that type of pollutant. And then we'll also share a number of case studies. We're planning to test the methodology with real projects. And so we'll provide those examples in the guidance, which I think is always really helpful to understand, to go from that sort of sometimes what seems like theoretical to what it actually looks like on the ground. And we will provide a little bit of discussion around that. And then of course, in the appendix, we will provide the details around calculation methods, illustrative examples, data sets, and the sort of the more nitty-gritty around these different water quality benefit accounting methods. So again, this is just an example of where we're heading and what might be contained in the guide. But of course, we will be adjusting this over time, so it might not look exactly like the table of contents we have here. Next slide. So one important question for the group is around which water quality parameters we will include in the water quality benefit accounting guide. Because there are lots of water quality parameters out there, unlike the volumetric water benefit accounting, which is looking at the volume of water is really what we're focused on. Here, there's a large number we could choose from in terms of water quality parameters for which we'd provide guidance on calculating the benefit for. So the decision around which ones to include will be based on at least two factors. One, really importantly, is what water quality parameters are most important for both business but also wider society and the environment, which pollutants are having a really big impact, and we're really motivated to address through the types of projects that we're talking about here. But also we're considering what tools, data, and methods are already available for calculating the benefits of these projects, because our intention here is not to develop new equations, new approaches, but actually to collate information of existing approaches, data, and tools to help calculate the benefits. So we really want to make sure that the parameters that we're considering, we're able to provide that guidance from existing information. And the final decision about which water quality parameters we will include in the guide will be made through consultation with our corporate partners and with our technical advisory group, which I'll be talking about in the next couple of slides. Next slide. So just to give you an idea of how we're engaging with different kinds of actors through this project, this is a diagram of our stakeholder, a really simple diagram of our stakeholder engagement here, because we want to make sure that this guidance is as robust as possible and will be practical and valuable to the actors that are seeking out this information. So we are engaging with a number of corporate partners who are providing sort of that corporate lens and the reality check of what this might look like for the projects they're interested in supporting. We also have an advisory group which provide a little bit more of sort of the technical lens. And we also have opportunities to engage with other interested users, such as this session today. So I'll describe how we're going to be engaging with the corporate partners and advisory group, but in terms of you all here today and other kinds of interested users, we will have touch points for feedback and for sharing out of information today and in future opportunities, such as when we put out the guide for the draft guidance, being able to get some feedback from other interested users beyond these core stakeholder engagement partners. And the core team here is the team that Nanda presented on the first slide, and it consists of the World Resources Institute, the Nature Conservancy, and LibNoTech, who are working day to day on the development of this guidance. Next slide. So in terms of the corporate partners, their role is to help support the project team, both as sponsors, providing funding for this work, and input to the process. So they're helping us to refine the scope to make sure what we're including in this body of work is something that's valuable to the corporate actors, also providing input on the practicality of the methods from that corporate lens, and also contributing information about those corporate water stewardship activities so that we can really ground that in the types of projects that are the ones that they're investing in. And also, as I mentioned, we'll be engaging in some case studies to pilot the method. So when we come up with the draft methodologies, we'll then be testing those on real cases of projects to make sure that it's practical, make sure it's providing the right kind of information, that we have the right kind of data to carry out those methods. So that will be really important for providing feedback to the methodologies and revising it before we finalize the guidance. And we anticipate we'll be engaging with these stakeholders, with the corporate partners, about on a monthly basis. Next slide. Our current corporate partners include Amazon Web Services, Cargill, Coca-Cola, Google, Meta, and Starbucks. And we're also working closely with AB InBev and Microsoft on this project. Next slide. In terms of our advisory group, this is made up of other interested stakeholders, both in the private sector, public sector, and academia, who will provide input to the project, but not support the project through funding. We'll also be including a number of technical experts who can provide that subject matter expertise to make sure we have a really strong scientific grounding for this guidance. So this could include water quality experts from institutions like the US Environmental Protection Agency, EU Water Framework Directive, academic institutions, and other types of organizations. And they will really guide the development of this methodology with more of that science lens and impact lens. So for example, they will help us in finalizing the selection of the water quality parameters of focus and advise us on the methods, data, and tools that we will include in the methodology. We have yet to form this advisory group. We've already made some headway in reaching out, but this advisory group will really be formalized after this session coming up in the next month or so. Next slide. To give you a sense of where we're heading time-wise, so we started working together this spring. We assembled the project team, some of the interested stakeholders, and some of the subject matter experts. So that's been happening the last few months. And we've been working on refining the project scope through that engagement with some of these actors. And you can see we're going to continue to do that through the next month or so. We've also spent some time conducting several landscape assessments, which really give us a sense of the relevant resources, standards, commitments, that information that's already out there that we can pull from for this guidance. And we're going to be presenting that during this session today, and we'll be collating that and putting that together in the next month or so. Then we'll be really focused on drafting that first version of the water quality benefit accounting methods. So through now until the early 2023. And then with that, we'll be developing those case studies that I mentioned, where we can test those methods on real projects so that we can get feedback on the practicality of the methods. We'll also be putting out the draft of the methods for peer review, and we'll use the feedback from that and from the case studies to revise and publish the finalized water quality benefit accounting guide sometime around, we'll be revising that between July and October of next year, and then aiming to launch the publication in November of 2023. Next slide. So since we're still relatively early on in this project, there are still opportunities to join us as corporate partners or advisory group members. If you're interested in this, if you have questions about what this would look like, feel free to contact any of the organizations that are part of the core team. And here's some contact info for representatives from each of these organizations. So feel free to reach out to us with any questions or to express your interest in joining us to be part of this effort. Next slide. So hopefully this has given you a good introduction to the project, where we've come from, where we're heading, some of the things we're thinking about, the decisions we're making. And now we're going to take a little bit of time to turn the tables a little bit and seek your input through a couple of targeted questions. So Nanda, do you want to put those questions out there as you took them down? Or okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. And we look forward to your questions and engaging with you today and in the future on this. Okay, maybe I'll put these questions out there. So this is a time that you can ask any questions about what I've already presented, but also we're seeking your input on a couple of key points here. So first of all, do you see this guide as potentially useful for your organization? And if you do, we're interested in how you might be using the guide. For example, are you more likely to set a quantitative water quality goal for your company if you have guidance on how to track benefits towards that goal? And for those of you who use the volumetric benefit accounting methodology that's already out there, what do you hope this guide emulates from that effort, and what would you like to see done differently with this guide as compared to that methodology? So please feel free to jump in and ask any questions about what we're sharing here, or to provide input on one of these two questions that we've posed here on the screen. Ananda, what's the best way for people to ask questions?
Yeah, so please raise your hand if you have any questions right now, or I cannot move my screen. So Kari, would you mind checking the Pathable platform and if there are any questions written on there? Also want to remind you, if you have any questions, if you cannot ask by live, then please also put the questions on Pathable platform and we will read your questions and we will respond it back to you.
Okay, I'm seeing, yeah, just a note from Jose from University of Oxford that will be reporting on our insights. So he's the rapporteur for the session. So I'm seeing, so I think, yeah, the Pathable is popping up. So feel free to put your questions or your responses to our questions in the Pathable chat.
Dan has raised his hand.
Great.
Hi, Carrie. It's great to hear you. Again, I was with PepsiCo for a while, and you were terrific with helping us through so much of our water stewardship activities. A couple of things. One is, I think it's a little too early, based on what I've seen so far, to say whether this would be useful. outside of anything but directional. So I think the directional answer is absolutely. I think every company should be interested in something like this because quality has been woefully overlooked. So as far as a directional answer, I would say absolutely keep going. One thing that struck me is, well, two things that struck me. One is I hope there could be some reference to water as a human right and the elements of that and protecting that as a company, and also the newest ratification of the human right to a sustainable, clean environment, because I think that's an important anchor on which to pin this work. The other thing is, what worries me is in-country laboratory testing capability for so many parameters, particularly in the developing and emerging world. So I think those are things that really have to be thought about as this project moves forward as well. But overall, I'm thrilled to see this. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Dan. Yes, it's good to see you again. And thanks so much for your insights. Great to hear that you think it'll be valuable. And yes, really great points about the human right to clean water, clean environment. In one of our previous discussions with some of our advisors, we definitely had a good discussion about benefits to people. So the connection, so the benefits to who and what does that look like? Yeah, and really good point about the difference in different places, the ability to have the data available to calculate benefits. So we'll definitely keep that in mind, and that's one of our intentions, is to make sure that this is applicable across different kinds of settings. So thanks so much for your insights. Nanda, you're muted if you're talking.
Oh yeah, I will go check the Platable platform, and if there's anything here. So yeah.
Okay, I see one, Nanda, from Derek Volmer.
Yeah.
So he is saying, he's still trying to understand the difference between monitoring and accounting for water quality. So can we elaborate a little bit about the difference of both? So I think in some ways there's a few different differences, and Nanda, feel free to jump in here. But one of the differences I see is sort of the investment of time and money in terms of what it takes to do really good monitoring versus what we're talking about here, estimating the benefits. So we're not proposing collecting any detailed new data, for example, in-stream data about water quality parameters. We're talking about using existing data, perhaps data about project implementation, and using that and sort of estimates about different performance. For example, the riparian corridor that I was talking about, we might use estimates of what we know about the efficacy of those kinds of riparian buffers, depending on the width of the buffer and the type of vegetation, to estimate that benefit rather than measuring in the stream that benefit. And the reason we would do this, I really am a big promoter. I've done a lot of work on monitoring evaluation, a big promoter of the project implementers collecting those types of data over a long term to make sure that the project is performing as it should do and that it's having the impact that we want on the freshwater ecosystem. But for this guidance, we're talking about sort of a broader estimate based on that information of project implementation and those sort of what we know about the efficacy of these kinds of interventions to sort of estimate what we think the project will be delivering on. So it's a little bit of that balance, as I said, of using scientific approaches, but keeping this really practical so that we're not spending all of our time and money on making these estimates, but actually investing in the project and doing good projects. But yes, I definitely support that the project implementers, such as Nature Conservancy or others, are collecting more detailed data about the performance of the project over the long term. So hopefully that helps. I'm not sure if that answers the question. Nanda, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it kind of ties to what Dan said previously, right? I come from Myanmar, and it's really hard to even to measure phenol, for example, right, in Myanmar, then in those cases, you might not be able to do the actual monitoring, but then you still need to report some sort of benefits of your project. In that case, this could be an alternative to, doing the monitoring. But I would agree that in the end, you still need to monitor the water resources and really measure the impact. But this is also something that is necessary in some areas where there are a lot of bottlenecks in monitoring. Yeah, we have a few more hands. Jairo?
Yeah, hi. So I wanted to ask, how do you guys see this framework interacting with the volumetric water accounting framework? And if you don't think that this might add more complexity for the corporations try to invest in water stewardship activities, and that might be detrimental of, since it's so much effort to account for every piece of the water stewardship activities, that might be detrimental to the amount of investments that we see in the future.
Yeah, great question. And I might open this up actually to Derek or Wendy, who are on the line from the NOTEC, who perform, and put you on the spot, but perform a lot of the calculations. Yes, we do for a lot of projects right now. We kind of, even if they have water quality benefits, we talk about them in terms of volumetric benefits. But Derek, I see you come off mute, so I'd love to hear your response.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, and I think I'll get into it a little bit in some of the slides that I'll present, and yeah, also in some of the later slides and speakers. But in short, I think it's really meant to be complementary and not meant to make it more of a burden or more onerous on the corporations, but rather the flip side of that. I think, to be able to be yet another resource that they can look to, to perform those calculations if that's something they have a certain, desire to do so for whatever reason, goals or targets or whatnot, or just wanting to report, to be able to have, this resource rather than nothing. Similar to the VWBA guidance document, quite out there. So hopefully that answers, but it's a great question and something we will be exploring. But yeah, by all means, not meant to make it more difficult, but somewhat the opposite of that. And I'll just comment on the monitoring, because I'm going to get, with the previous question, I am going to get into that with my slides as well. So I'll try to clarify as well. I think Kari and Nanda did great so far, but I'll chip in a little bit at that point.
Yeah. And then we have a hand from Alexander.
Hi there, thank you. Hi, my name is Alex. Sorry for a bit of background. I'm with an organization called Analytics, which performs impact measurement work for TPG.
Alex, sorry, very hard to hear you actually. Would you be able to type the question on Protable? Is that a possibility for you?
Sorry, is this any better?
Much better now, yeah.
Hopefully. Okay, good. Well, sorry for the background noise. My name is Alex. I'm with an organization called Analytics. We perform impact measurement work for TPG, and specifically the TPG Rise funds, which are a large kind of private equity impact investing strategy. As impact investors looking into the space, I think we've had some trouble getting our arms around, particularly for companies that are highly water intensive, or for companies that are specifically kind of water infrastructure companies, trying to understand how to monetize not just kind of the risks and the resilience components. I think there are a lot of really good tools for that, trying to understand what water risks look like for a company's, top, bottom line, whatever, but also understanding what externalities actually look like, what the kind of social environmental externalities of a company's activities might look like, what improvement on certain benchmarks would entail from that perspective. So I guess to the extent that you feel that this will externalities, if you could speak to what some of those categories and pathways might be, and whether you're optimistic that this brings us closer to, a social cost of water, or a value of water in a way that we have on the kind of on the carbon side, an understanding is much more hyper local and specific for water. But thanks again, and really looking forward to seeing the development of the tool.
Thanks for the question. And yeah, the rest of the team, would you have a response to that? I'm not very much of an expert in that area, so.
Yeah, I'll just offer, I think, all great commentary and kind of questions built into that response there. I think we really want to limit the scope of this to, you know, accounting for the water quality benefits at a project level. So it is, we do have to be very careful, I think, about how much we can achieve with what we're setting out. I think, again, those are all great comments, and our intent to is to, in the guidance document, you know, maybe speak to as many of those topics or themes that you addressed in some of the introductory material and background information, without really having the objective of doing a deep dive in any of those topics. So we are somewhat limited in, you know, what we're setting out to achieve in that regard. But yeah, all great perspective there. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll just add that I wanted to emphasize that the focus of this initiative is on responses to perceived shared water challenges in the watersheds where companies are operating, rather than on their own water quality impacts. Where a company is operating in a region with high water quality issues, that is obviously something important to consider in terms of engagement with local stakeholders. So if there are issues with nutrient runoff and eutrophication in receiving water bodies, then engaging with local organizations on trying to move the needle on those issues is important. But I did want to emphasize that this is on the response end rather than on looking closely at what the water quality discharges from a facility and the water quality impacts associated with that.
Thanks for the response, Wendy, and also Derek. I haven't checked in Pataball. We don't have any more questions. I have a comment from Dan, but I will respond in writing. If we don't have any other questions, I'll pause here a bit. If we don't have any other questions, then we will move on with the second session on the existing data and tool. All right, so I don't see any hands now. So let's move on to the existing data and tool. And I would like to invite Derek to present some of the findings from this investigation. So, hi, Derek.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Nanda. Thanks, Kari, for the great job so far. And again, everyone for the great questions and discussion. And once again, for attending this session. Before I get going into this, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself, give some background that hopefully will provide some context with what I'm about to cover in the next slide. I'm an agricultural engineer by training with a family farming background. So really much of the work I've done in my career here at Limnotech focuses on water quality issues, primarily sediment and nutrient runoff from agricultural watersheds and the impairments that they cause, such as annual harmful algal blooms and hypoxia in Lake Erie, which is one of the five Great Lakes in the US, and also looking at strategies for mitigating those water quality impairments. So hopefully that provides some context in what I'll present and just my focus or bias, I suppose. But yeah, I guess, are the slides up now? I'm not seeing them. It went away, or there we go. Yep. Yeah, go ahead with that slide then. So as we begin to think about what the contents of the water quality benefit accounting guidance document might look like, we wanted to cast a wide net during this landscape assessment part one, which involved developing an inventory of any method, approach, model, tool, calculator, data set, or other resource that falls into this really broad universe of ways to understand the water quality benefits resulting from implementation of corporate water stewardship projects or activities or best management practices. And so for those of you familiar with the volumetric water benefit accounting, or VWBA guidance document that was mentioned earlier, you might know it recommends methods like the curve number method or volume treated method or recharge method and so on, depending on the project situation. And so the landscape assessment for WQBA is just the starting point for us right now, but we have a similar endpoint in mind. We don't want to carry forward an exhaustive list of anything and everything that's out there, but we do want to explore as many of those possibilities as we can come up with, and then work to narrow that list down by gathering feedback from folks like you and our corporate partners to make decisions on which approaches should be carried forward to the next step, which are most practical, easy to use, things like that. So with that, what I'll do in the remainder of my slides is go through these 4 major categories, and that's monitoring, modeling, web-based tools, and data sets or other resources. So as you'll see in the next slides, we came up with several subcategories and specific examples under each major grouping. But again, the goal was not to have an exhaustive list of all possibilities out there. For example, we didn't want to list dozens and dozens of watershed scale models that could be used to predict reduction in sediment, for example, from project implementation. But instead, we wanted to group those as a larger subcategory and list some of the most commonly applied models. That's what our intent was to do here. So please keep that in mind. And also, I don't want to go through the results of all the attributes that were recorded and listed here, but rather demonstrate some of the types of information that we're recording for each entry in our inventory. So we really hope to use these as well as other criteria to inform whether or not a given entry moves forward to the next step as a potential recommended method in the WQBA guidance document. For example, if a particular approach is very complex and intense in the input requirements, it might not be a recommended method under most circumstances because it's just not practical for corporations to use that if they're interested in water quality benefit accounting. Or another example, if a model is proprietary, it's not open to the public, it may be more limiting in its widespread use and adoption for the purposes of WQBA. Not to say it's not a great model and has certain applications, but just not necessarily something that we want to carry forward and recommend. Yes, go ahead in the next slide. So the first major category we have is monitoring as a strategy to show water quality benefits. So again, this was a question, and Kari addressed it great with some answers there. What we mean by monitoring in the context of showing water quality benefits from project implementation is really distinguished between what I would think of as relatively larger scale in-stream or in-lake monitoring of various water bodies and pollutants over time to show much larger scale improvements or degradation as a result of what's happening to the upstream watershed or any discharges going into that. So really, this type of monitoring that might be a strategy is focused on measuring reductions in pollutant concentration or loads, or using indicators to infer their performance, or simply keeping an inventory of reduced inputs, but some type of tracking, related to the projects that are implemented to ensure that they are having the benefits that are anticipated. And again, for those familiar with the VWBA guidance document, it does suggest direct monitoring is a way that can be used to show volumetric benefits using approaches like the volume treated method or the hydrograph method. So we feel that direct monitoring of water quality improvements can and has been used in certain circumstances. For example, in the top right photo there, this is a water quality sampling device housed in the box that is shown connected with a solar panel for powering it, and it pulls water samples from the constructed wetland, which is in the background, and it'll tell us how effective this particular wetland is at improving the water quality of the stream that it's treating, with both some inlet and outlet monitoring of water quality. But in instances where direct measurements are not practical or too costly, there are other monitoring type approaches that could be used kind of indirectly to inform water quality benefits. And the first one listed surrogate indicators. So in the bottom right photo, this is an example of annual soil testing that's taking place where soil core is being collected from a cornfield, and that's being tested for soil phosphorus content and other properties. And these types of indicators might be able to use to demonstrate improved agricultural soil conditions that are linked to the improved water quality in receiving water bodies. And lastly, we have some accounting of the inputs or inventory accounting. And an example listed here again is tracking fertilizer or manure application masses in an agricultural production area, both during a baseline or pre-intervention situation, and then presumably some water stewardship activity happens or some intervention occurs and there's some type of reduction in the amount of, let's say, nitrogen fertilizer going into a certain geographic area. And that could be a way to infer a water quality benefit by inventory accounting. Go ahead to the next slide, thank you. So the second and probably largest category really is modeling type approaches to calculate water quality benefits. And this slide has a fair amount of information, so I'll try to take some time to walk through it. First on the left, we've subdivided the modeling tools into different categories or types, including relatively complex approaches like mechanistic, watershed, or field scale models, ranging down to simpler approaches like empirical models, regression models, or even simple spreadsheet calculators that typically have fewer input requirements. So as part of our landscape assessment work, we've been recording the various types of attributes or information like you see here in the middle boxes, including the primary uses or applicability. For example, is it more of an agricultural watershed application or tool versus an urban watershed tool? The general availability of it, like I mentioned earlier, is it open source and free to public use versus proprietary? Again, the relative complexity or resources that are needed to apply the model. If you're an individual applying it, do you need months or years of training to understand it well, or is it something that can be picked up with just a few hours or days worth of training, as well as input development? And then lastly, this was covered as well earlier, just looking at the types of output parameters or water pollutants that a particular model or tool might simulate. And so finally, on the right side, we've listed some of the most commonly applied models or tools that we've come across in our work with water quality modeling applications. And again, the purpose here was not to necessarily have an exhaustive list, but for each of the major subcategories on the far left, they have some examples of commonly applied models. For example, SWOT, HSPF, warmth, and swim are all examples of continuous simulation models, most often applied at watershed scales. And generally, they're considered more complex in terms of the knowledge required to use them and the level of inputs and parameterization. And then towards the bottom, we have a list of much more simpler models that are generally easier to use and less strenuous to set up, like Steppel, Russell, or the modified simple method. Next slide. Yeah, so next we have web-based tools category. And much like the previous modeling topic, there's really probably hundreds of potential web-based tools out there that we could have listed here. So we wanted to avoid doing that, but started with some examples that our team had the most familiarity with. And again, we recognize that many of you out there might have worked with other web tools that could be listed here. So please offer that during our next break or question session, or reach out to us after the session, or put it in the chat if you have anything that you're most familiar with or have used in your experience. And again, note here, we're also recording the similar types of attributes and information related to whether these types of web tools might be worth recommending in the eventual guidance document. For example, some of these, like the first two on the list, are very geographically specific applications. So that could either be viewed as a limitation because you can't really apply it elsewhere with a lot of confidence, or it might be an advantage in that it has a rich history of modeling that is presumably the best available tool out there. In the case of the Chesapeake assessment scenario tool, it has decades of monitoring and modeling that went into develop the underlying watershed and receiving water models that eventually resulted in this tool that can predict the nutrient reduction benefits of different actions. And often, just important to note here that many of these web-based tools have an underlying model of some variation or empirical approach that overlaps with what was shown on the previous slide. So it's not necessarily something new, but we did think it was important to document these types of web-based applications because they might be more commonly used or known than the underlying modeling framework. For example, the nutrient tracking tool there towards the middle of the list uses Apex as its underlying model framework, and the next one on the list, Model My Watershed, uses the GLWF model, which was also listed on the previous slide. Next slide. Okay, so this is my last slide, and finally we created this data sets or other resources category as somewhat of a place to list any other relevant items that we came across that didn't necessarily fit nicely into the previous categories. Although again, arguably there is some overlap between them, because most of these examples here are some type of modeling based or monitoring based study or efforts. But what makes them unique is really their pre-existing resources that could be potentially used or relied upon to inform the water quality benefits, rather than recreating another model or monitoring approach like I first described. And once again, perhaps even more so than any of the other previous examples, this list is really just a small fraction of the potential resources out there that could be used. And what we're looking for in terms of criteria for inclusion is for these types of resources to be relatively well known or developed by reliable authors or institutions, as well as having some precedence for application. For example, the science-based targets for nature, which I think has a few sessions, at different times during World Water Week, uses the McDowell Global Nutrient Model for its freshwater science-based targets. And also the International Stormwater Database listed there last is really one of the most commonly used resources, at least in the United States, to understand the potential benefits of urban best management practices, but also certain agricultural best management practices. So that concludes my slides on the landscape assessment part one, covering the inventory of existing tools, methods, and data sets. Yeah, so that moves us to our next question and answer segment. So if anybody has any immediate questions or comments, please raise your hand like we did before, or put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them here. I don't know if we're doing okay on time or if we need to move on. So.
We can take a couple of questions and then we can move on. And I have one comment from Alda. Just to make sure I understand it right, the tool is to map the water quality risk and benefits to a given company based in a given watershed, for example, for source protection. It is not meant to quantify a company's impact on water quality. Yeah, I think that's correct, right? So it is not to quantify the company's impact on water quality, but it is to account for the benefits from a project implemented by a company in a given watershed.
That's right, Nanda. So I think it's also not necessarily to understand their risks. To map the water quality risk. So I think the first part of that question, that's also maybe covered in some other efforts or initiatives to understand the overall impact, which is what you're saying in the second part of that question. So yeah, really focused on if a particular project or action is implemented, understanding the benefits surrounding that. But there is maybe a step before that if a company wants to understand its greater impact and set targets or whatnot around that this is not attempting to address that.
Yeah, thanks, Derek.
Can I just step in just to clarify in the question? It says we're calculating the benefits to the company. And I just want to clarify that that's not our intention, that we're looking at the benefit to the company, but actually the benefit to the watershed or whatever the target might be, the stream or the land area. So just want to clarify that that's not our intention here.
Yeah, thanks, Kari. We can take one more question before we move on with the last segment of the presentation. So we can take one more if you have any questions. I'll pause for 10 seconds, and if I don't get responses in 10 seconds, then I'll move on. Okay, I think we're good to move on. So let's move on to the last segment of the presentation. Let me go back to the presentation. All right. So I'm gonna go back a little bit when Kari explained that when we are looking at the water quality benefits, we are not just looking at the water quality benefits that are important to the businesses, but also we're looking at the water quality benefits that are important for the society and the environment as in a broader scope. And also we look into what is feasible with the existing data, tools, and methods that Derek just presented. So we have to look at all these three pillars, and we have explained the first pillar, so we are going to move on with the second pillar, what is important for the big society and the environment. So to answer the question, we look into three different, we came up with three different general categories of water quality benefits. So the first general category of water quality benefit is on the aquatic life. So what is living in the water, what is good for the biological ecosystems that are living in the water. The second big category of water quality benefit is on how it impacts the human health. So the toxics that are going to be in drinking water, the recreational values of the water, such as algal bloom and other bacteria that are living in the water. In addition to that, you can also think about how the water tastes and how the water smells. So it's odor. Yeah, so it's not odor. We found these three big categories of water quality benefits. So in each three big categories, we look into what are the different frameworks that are important to a lot of countries. So we look into US EPA's water quality criteria, and then in water quality criteria, we found aspects like toxic, nutrients, biological pollutants, in addition to specific compounds that are important for water taste and odor. We also look into the EU Water Framework Directive, and from that, we also found different substances, different water quality parameters that are important for these three big categories. SDGs are also important because US EPA and EU, they are used by the countries in US and the countries in the EU, but also they are all referred to by a lot of countries in Asia. But there's also SDGs that are relevant for all the broader categories. So in SDG, the main parameters that they measure: oxygen salinity, nitrogen, phosphorus, acidification. But there are some countries, in addition to the parameter explained in the SDGs, they can go a level higher with the indicators that is more relevant to them. Things like biological pollution, radioactivity, that kind of stuff. This is not to say that these are the parameters that we are going to focus on when we develop the water quality benefit accounting methodology, but this is just to look into what parameters are also important for the wide society and the environment. We also look into the planetary boundaries, because planetary boundaries, it's referred to by a lot of publication, journalists, etc. And the planetary boundaries, there are two major categories. One is novel entities. So these are the man-made pollutants, things like plastics, pesticide, antibiotics, solvents, heavy metal, radioactive material, and also products produced by chemical industry. Those are already crossing the planetary boundaries of the novel entities. So these are actually important water quality parameters as well. Also, you can think about biogeochemical cycles, things like nitrogen and phosphorus. Actually, the human society has produced more nitrogen than any other parts of the global the biome has produced. So the nitrogen boundaries we have crossed it already. Also, there are phosphorus, with nitrogen and phosphorus together, they lead to eutrophication and stuff as well. Then we look at what are the important parameters for businesses. So that is done by one of our team members from the WRI. So I'm going to invite Caroline to explain this as well. So Caroline, hi.
Hi, thanks, Nanda. And just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Caroline Black, one of the Corporate Water Stewardship Research Associates at WRI as well. So just a brief overview, and just to give some insight into kind of the group of corporations we were looking at. We mostly looked at companies who interact with WRI and some of the main corporate water stewardship initiatives. So this is not an exhaustive list, and we'll get a better understanding of kind of the gaps and ambitions of corporates once we expand corporate stakeholders. So just a brief background of what we learned from businesses is that most companies that we interviewed in the stakeholder process don't currently have a corporate water quality target, but many fund basin or local stewardship projects that have water quality benefits or would like to in the future. And that water quality benefits for existing projects are generally not being quantified or tracked in a consistent way across the enterprise or across sector. And that companies that we interviewed primarily anticipated using this guidance to quantify and report the water quality benefits of projects that they fund, and to also allow them to follow and refer to a common methodology that highlights each industry's best practice. So there is interest in water quality benefit guidance for a range of water quality constituents such as nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, temperature, bacteria in both surface and groundwater across a range of sectors and landscapes. And now I'll just give a little bit of insight into specific sectors. So for consumer products from the companies that we looked into, many have made qualitative commitments related to maintaining water quality in the basins in which they operate, and several quantities, in fact, monitor withdrawals and employ tertiary treatment in a few locations along their supply chains, mostly internally, operationally, but don't have quantitative or science-based targets for water quality. In the chemical, industrials, and paper and pulp sectors, many have made qualitative commitments as well related to net water positive impact in that initiative, and employ a contextual site prioritization for water quality, and also aim to achieve that net positive water impact in operations and AWS certification for sites. So they're involved in those type of initiatives. But the targets are kind of in the next 10 to 15 years and not quantitative as well. We did find that in paper and pulp in that industry, companies focus on a more quantitative approach for discharges of BOD. The pharmaceutical sector was interesting because it's not that typical nitrogen, phosphorus water quality issue. And we found that most non-generics companies follow the recommended industry standard levels for pharmaceutical effluent, and they follow the PI pharmaceuticals in the environment guidelines. Whereas for antimicrobial products, there isn't a scientific consensus on what a safe level of antimicrobial level would be, but there is an industry-led standard for those types of pollutants, emerging pollutants. And then next slide, Nanda. In the ag, food, and beverage sector, many companies as well have made qualitative commitments to improve water quality in priority basins. So again, using that contextual prioritization in their operations or supply chains. Cargill in particular has a quantitative target to reduce 5 million kilograms of water pollutants in priority watersheds by 2030, which was calculated based on, again, that nutrient footprint of their agricultural supply chain. We also noticed that many companies in this sector are members of the CEO Water Mandate, Water Resilience Coalition, and pledge for that net positive water impact in basins by 2050. And then finally, in the tech sector, one company, in particular, Google, has a qualitative commitment to restore and improve the quality of water and health, again, in its ecosystems and basins where it operates, akin to that net positive water impact. But its projects are mostly focused on replenishment. Several also fund projects that improve water quality, but don't have quantitative targets or commitments. Again, we're seeing this need for the guidance. And then one company in particular, Microsoft, was a member of the WRC and has pledged more of a measurable impact, again, with net positive water impact. So we're seeing a lot of engagement with the existing initiatives, which makes us hopeful that there will be some engagement with this guidance as well. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Caroline. So we are tight on time. So before we open up to the questions and answer, I want to conclude the presentations with you. So today we have introduced to you the project plans of what we're going to do, what water quality benefit accounting project is actually going to do, how we are going to engage with the different stakeholders. So remember about the corporate partners as well as the advisory group. We haven't finalized all these groups yet. So if you have interest in participating, if you're a business that want to create case studies out of water quality benefit accounting, this is the right time to join this effort. If you are very interested in the technical aspect of how we're going to account the benefits, please be welcome to join the advisory group as well. And then the landscape assessment that we have presented to you, based on the landscape assessment, we as a project team are going to sit down, and then we are going to decide on what are the scopes of the work that we are going to do, what's possible, what's not possible, what's going to be recommended in the future. So those aspects are going to be recommended as well. And then in the end, the water quality benefit accounting methodology will be developed and it will be implemented with the corporate partners. And next year, by this time, we will hopefully have the project concluded and the work published again by the Stockholm World Water Week. So thanks for everyone, and I will open up the floor to questions. Let me check Pathable as well. Do we have more questions? No, there's no questions from the participants. So as usual, I will wait 10 more seconds. If you have a question, it's time for you to raise your hand or type your question in on Pathable. Otherwise, we will move on with the panel discussion. Last call. Okay, we don't have any questions and we are very tight on time, so we will open up the panel discussion. So I will hand over to Shivani. It's gonna be moderating the panel discussion.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Shivani, research assistant on WRI's corporate water stewardship team. And we've invited several of the companies that we're working with on this initiative to participate in a short panel discussion, primarily focused on the impact that they envision that this guidance will have on their company's strategy, on the corporate water stewardship space as a whole, and in the broader context of the watershed. Before we begin, I do see there's one hand up from Marina. So maybe if you have a question, you can go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, for sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Joe, I don't know if it's just for me, but the chat for me is disabled. So I'm not sure if anyone have questions. So, but I have one.
Oh, yes. Sorry, if you have questions to type, you have to type it on Pathable because the chats for participants are disabled on Zoom.
Ah, okay, good. So maybe to Caroline, and sorry because I started later, I joined later the meeting, but I saw your overview regarding which kind of commitments that the companies do regarding quality of water, and what do we recommend? Because from the company sides, it's difficult because each company have a different process and for sure different kind of how to say type of quality that as rate. So what do you recommend? Because when disclosure some KPIs or data, it's important to be comparable. So how do you evaluate this?
Yeah, so I guess without insight into the sector or company you're describing, I wouldn't make a recommendation per se, but I would say that a lot of success has been found in doing this contextual prioritization process and seeing where most impact can be made on a local level. But you'll hear more from companies in the panel on kind of some of their success stories as well in water quality benefit accounting and commitment setting.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's maybe a good lead into the panel discussion. So we have with us today Madhu from Coca-Cola, Carolina from AB InBev, and Shuka from Cargill. So thank you, all of you again for joining us today. And I think to start out, I'll just ask each of you to do brief introductions and then talk about if your company has a water quality related goal or commitment, or if you engage in projects to improve water quality, and if you could discuss maybe a few examples from that. So I think we'll start with Madhu and then go to Carolina and then Shuka.
Sure. Thank you, Shivani. I'm Madhu Rajesh, and I'm Senior Director for Water and Agriculture at Coca-Cola. For us as a beverage company, access to sufficient amounts of high quality fresh water is really vital to the long-term sustainability of our company and the communities in which we operate. And we see water quality as being a very key component of watershed health and have a goal to implement watershed health plans in all of our priority watersheds. We also have a goal of promoting advanced water management practices, such as reducing fertilizer and pesticide use for all our global priority ingredients that are grown in water-stressed regions. So you can see water quality is a key component of watershed health. And by looking at ways in which, through our own work and through our supply chain, we can help reduce water quality issues is a part of our 2030 water security strategy. And you asked me to share briefly some examples of how we've been engaging in projects that have contributed to water quality. So I'd just like to share a couple of examples on that. I'll start with the UK because that's where I'm based. And so in the UK, the Coca-Cola Foundation has provided more than $4.5 million to WWF UK since 2011, so going back to over a decade, to protect and replenish rivers and streams, while also looking at supply chain sustainability related to a major area of sugar beet production in East Anglia, which is one of the most water-stressed areas of the UK. This particular initiative provided local farmers with advice on how they can enrich soils, how they can reduce runoff and nutrient leaching, and that in turn helped improve river health, water quality, and habitats. Over a 3-year period, this program replenished around 1.2 billion liters of water. So that was a quantitative benefit that the program had. But it also supported farmers to introduce more soil-sensitive practices, which resulted in about 4,000 areas of land being farmed more sustainably. Then I'll talk about another project that we have called Project Catalyst with WWF, again in Australia. Where again, with support of the Coca-Cola Foundation, the program engaged with more than 130 sugarcane farmers to look at sustainable farming techniques. And that led to a reduction of about 180 metric ton per year of chemical runoff and improved the water quality of about 150 billion liters of water. A third example that I'd like to share is from Ontario in Canada, where draining of wetlands over time had led to increased runoff and pollution of Lake Erie. And with support from the Coca-Cola Foundation and local partners, Ducks Unlimited Canada and Ducks Unlimited Inc., we restored about 22 wetlands totaling about 10 hectares through a nature-based solution that uses the wetlands to reduce runoff and nutrient pollution. And it slows the release of water. The project had a projected replenish benefit of about 1.4 billion liters of water annually. But this green infrastructure approach also helped cut down phosphorus that entered the lake, and it helped to prevent algae blooms and oxygen depletion that was threatening the ecosystem. So you can see a number of our projects that were originally designed to be water replenishment projects also have a water quality benefit on the ecosystems that they're in. So, that has been the background of the work that we've done so far. And going forward in our 2030 water security strategy, we have a big focus on watershed health and watershed stewardship implementation, and water quality is a key part of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu. And now I'll go to Carolina next.
Thank you, Shivani. Thank you for inviting us to be part of this panel. I actually felt very well represented when Caroline was giving her insights of the interviews she had with several companies. And like similar to Coca-Cola, AB InBev, well, being the largest brewery in the world, we are dependent on water. No water, no beer, it's our main ingredient. And of course, we are committed to be stewards of this very precious resource, not only for our company, but for the communities, and water is the basis of life. And we did, when we launched back in 2018, our global sustainability goals, we did launch a very ambitious goal on water stewardship. And I even have it here and even wanted, I cannot share screen, but that's okay. So our goal, which I'm very proud of, is that 100% of our communities in high stress areas will have measurably improved water availability and quality by 2025. I think this water goal is very ambitious for many reasons. On the one hand, it's because we're seeing a holistic view of how to improve water availability and quality. So we're already seeing quality in the core of our goal, but also we are measurably improving, which means that from the very initial moment where we establish a project in any of these high stress areas, we are taking a baseline and with science and with key partners, we are delivering a measurable improved impact. We, as many companies, we do water risk assessments to define where are the places around the world where we're seeing an increasing water risk. Some of these risks are physical, are due to water scarcity or water quality. And then in each of these sites and with key local partners, we develop a plan to deliver on this goal, to have the measurable improved impact. This is also interesting because, as you know, water is very local and it's dependent on a specific context. It requires specific governance. So this is a big challenge for us because every time that we are going to implement a project and build a project, we need to understand the local context and partner with the key stakeholders in a basin to define and to build a project that is tailor-made for that purpose. And we've counted with great partners, amongst them, of course, WRI, TNC, WWF, like Coca-Cola was saying. And actually, we also work with Coca-Cola in some of our projects, especially in El Salvador, where we bottle for Coca-Cola, and together we are doing a very ambitious project to increase water availability in all the volcano region of El Salvador. That said, I do agree with Caroline and with the broader perspective that we have been focusing a lot on water scarcity and how to address this very complex issue, that sometimes water quality has not been our main focus of attention. And I do think that this framework and what you're proposing is going to be very important for us to keep improving the holistic way that we approach water stewardship. And especially now, since surface water and groundwater, it's being more scarce. Water quality is playing a major role now that we are all pushing our efforts towards increasing water reuse in all of our operations. So we do see a very big added value on these type of initiatives like the one that you presented today. We have many, many projects that we can talk about and that we're very proud of. I would just give you an example. Similar to the projects that Coca-Cola already mentioned and that are very inspiring. We have several of them across the world. Maybe just to give one example, it would be one of our biggest water stewardship projects is in Mexico, where we also have our largest brewery in the world in Zacatecas, and one of our biggest breweries in Apan. And there we have a big partnership with different stakeholders, but amongst them the GIZ, the German Corporation for Sustainable Development, and it's an 8 million euro project where we have the very ambitious task that in 8 years, we want to start, in only 3 years, we want to start improving the water availability in this place that has different water challenges. The way that we're doing that, of course, on a big pillar of the project is nature-based solutions and how we restore the ecosystem, we prevent erosion to increase the water recharge of the aquifers. But that's not enough, right? And also these actions take a very long time to deliver and come into fruition. So we're also working with the main water consumer in the region, which is agriculture, helping farmers transition to regenerative agriculture, which of course has many water quality benefits, as the Coca-Cola team was explaining as well. So on the one hand, transitioning to regenerative agriculture, but also changing to drip irrigation systems to make the farmers become way more efficient. Of course, this initiative also have big components of measuring on governance and engaging with all the communities and stakeholders. And together we aimed to be a game changer in this very daunting region where water scarcity it's becoming a reality. And we have several of these initiatives all across the world, but I just wanted to pass it on to Cargill because I know that they have also exciting projects to talk about.
Yes, thanks, Carolina. So I'm Truke Smoor. I'm the Global Sustainability Director at Cargill and for water, and I'm globally responsible for our water strategy and the associated targets and commitments. And so as you saw in the earlier presentation, we are one of those very few companies that have set a quantitative water quality goal for our supply chain. And it's actually part of the journey that we've been on, because when we look at water, it's very clear that it's critical for our supply chain, for our operations, as many have called out here. But it's also very clear that we have to prioritize action. And with prioritize action, we have to understand that local context. And so as we have set our targets and we've taken that approach of how can we prioritize our action, but also how can we focus on those water issues in their local context to address those issues that needs to be addressed. And that has led to us mapping our footprint across our supply chain, but then also overlaying that with what are the key issues. And this is where we pulled in water quality as well as availability and access to safe drinking water, because what we see is that it's to operationalize these strategies, it's so critical to create that local ownership and to create that sense of how these targets actually are meaningful in at that local level. And so by incorporating the nuance of, is it about water availability, is it about scarcity, or is it about pollution, or is it about access to safe drinking water or infrastructure, that allows them to say, it's like, well, within that local context, you can tailor your programs to what is relevant for those local stakeholders. And that has been really a difference towards how we can actually achieve our targets. So when, as a result of that analysis and of that mapping, we actually landed on a quantitative target for water availability to restore 600 billion liters, but also that quantitative target to improve water quality and reduce pollutants ending up in the waterways. If you then look at like how we operationalize this, what is happening on the ground, it actually goes back to what is Cargill and what are we doing and what's our position in the value chain. So Cargill connects on one hand farmers, ranchers, growers with their markets for agricultural commodities, whether those are grains or oil seeds or protein. And on the other hand, we're providing feed ingredients and food ingredients to companies like Coca-Cola or AB InBev, and but also many others. And that role in the value chain is really what is driving our programs as well. It's just like, how can we be that trusted partner for our customers, but also how can we secure these supply chains and build the resiliency in that is needed to address the changing climate, to address the droughts, the extreme weathers, the changing weather patterns that we are seeing, and how can we help our customers and our stakeholders in these local communities with our understanding of the supply chain. So this has led to really looking at the opportunities that are in agriculture to address these issues, because many of you have probably heard that before, like globally, on average, 70% of the water use is associated with agriculture. In that local context, that means that agriculture also has a massive opportunity to actually influence how water is used and how nutrients can end up in runoff or can be actually remained in the ground and contribute to a better soil health. So this is where, if you look at our approach, you can see it basically at 3 levels. When you say it starts with the in-field approach, working directly with farmers on implementing regenerative agriculture. And for example, in North America, we've looked at a number of programs, but also set up our own program, Regen Connect, to really work with farmers directly to help them implement these programs at scale. And we've reached over 350,000 acres of Regen Ag practices implemented across all our programs. The next level is actually actual field, which is very important because there's also a restoration component to it. And there's a biodiversity and the connectivity between biodiversity and water quality and runoff. So this is where we're looking at what can you do around those fields to actually bring a next level to complement what's happening in field. And then the third level is actually at that basin scale, where you look at nature-based solutions like a wetland restoration that then make the picture complete of addressing all these different aspects, whether it's replenishment or water quality in that local context.
Great, thank you all so much for giving a little bit of insight and background on the baseline of your company's activities and what you're doing regarding water quality. I'd like to move on quickly to sort of the impact that you think that water quality benefit accounting guidance will have. And so for that, I'd like to start with Madhu and ask, why would water quality benefit accounting guidance be important to your company, to your water strategy, to the water quality projects that you implement, and how do you envision using that guidance?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for this question. As I mentioned before, water quality is an integral part of our 2030 water security strategy, and we have our ambition is to work in all our global priority watersheds to look at implementing watershed stewardship plans. Last year, we worked with the Nature Conservancy to develop a watershed health framework that we are rolling out across our watersheds. And water quality is a key issue, but at the moment, there are no standardized methods of accounting for the water quality benefits or guidance on what are the kinds of projects that would help maximize water quality benefits in watersheds that can then help determine and guide companies on the kinds of projects that we can implement. So I think that is a key area that we hope the guidance will help address, and that will really ensure that many of the new projects that many companies like ours design are looking at addressing shared water quality challenges, factoring in the right kind of activities that would contribute to addressing these challenges, and building in appropriate water quality measurement indicators and calculation methods to optimize work that can be done in this space.
Great, thank you. And then moving on to Carolina, I can ask you the same question. How do you think you will use this guidance, or what importance will it have to your company and your water strategy? But maybe also, what do you see the impact being on the corporate water stewardship space, as a whole? Do you think this will spur companies to set more water quality targets? What do you envision that impact looking like?
Well, thank you for the question, and I think that Madhu spoke brilliantly about the benefits that this means for beverage companies and consumer good companies. For us, as I mentioned previously, I think that we are more experienced, and our biggest focus has been more on improving water availability, and we are more well versed on how to measure these, and it has been our biggest driver. Of course, the reason is because in most of the water stress areas, we see scarcity sometimes as the most imminent challenge, as a physical challenge, whereas sometimes water quality can be more easily addressed. Of course, when the physical risk is water quality related, especially, we will develop a plan just for that. However, in all of these projects where we are trying to increase water availability, we're having quality benefits, and sometimes we are blind to those quality benefits. We're improving the quality of a watershed, and we are not even measuring with a standardized guidance. So I think that including these in all of the projects that we're already doing across the world is going to give us a bigger and more holistic view on water stewardship. So for us, it's definitely an added value that will improve the way that we are working in the watersheds. And also, I think this is becoming each day, as I mentioned, much more relevant as water reuse is becoming a big priority, not only for when we do tertiary treatment within our own operations and to reuse within our own operations, but also for other uses like agriculture and so forth, and for the benefit of the communities that are surrounding us. So I think that this literacy and these standardized measurements on water quality are going to be very, very useful as we move forward, which even more innovative and ambitious ways of doing water stewardship.
Thank you. And finally, in the last couple minutes, I'd like to turn to Truca. And, you know, although we've mentioned that this guidance will focus on accounting for benefits at the project level, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the impact you envision that it will have on the sort of broader watershed context or broader water quality of bodies of water in a basin.
Yeah, and I think it's very critical also for raising the awareness, but also scaling how we can work towards improving water quality. I could see it as really like as it's almost like a water quality as such an issue that's where there's such a limited awareness today. As people are focused on scarcity, but don't realize how water quality actually affects their operations and affects nature in the areas that we live and in the communities that are surrounding our operations and our supply chain. So for Cargill specifically, like our quantitative targets make that we want to quantify our progress and we track our progress of our projects. Today, we're working with trusted partners like Nimrotech and TNC who are here at on the call to look at how we can best quantify these impacts. But in the end, we don't want this to be a Cargill way of doing this. We want to have a wider acceptance, but also we ideally work towards the states that everyone looks at these water quality impacts and measures them as synergies and stack benefits of their replenishment projects, but also in those areas where that is needed, really focus on what are these impacts of related to water quality that really drive the watershed health in these local basins.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I think I'll pass it over to Nanda for the last 2 minutes to close out, but thank you again to all of our panelists and for those insights that you brought to this discussion.
All right, thanks, Shivani, and thanks all the panelists. It was a very interesting discussion, and it will be very influential to keep this upskilling among the all different corporate partners. So we have 1 more minute, and I would like to close with something very personal, and I want to show you how students look like where I come from. We wear white shirts and then green longies, basically, you know, sarongs. And then when the teacher comes in and we say something in Burmese, it says Jama Shrinlan Baze. Basically, that means be healthy and be recharged. I find this very relevant to what's happening these days. We just lived through several years of pandemic. We are facing a lot of challenges. And I want to remind all the people in the water community, which is very small, and we have a long way ahead to make sure that we stay healthy and we still recharge so that we can work together collectively until we reach the goal that we want to achieve. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to wish you Jama Shrinlan Baze, or be healthy and be recharged. And thanks a lot for being here today and listening to our conversations. And I hope you can participate in one of our efforts in the future, and see you soon if you are going to be in Stockholm. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, I'm gonna close the call now.